Hello, hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey, perfectly. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. Where are you calling in from right now? Where on your
Uh,
journey are you?
I'm calling in from London. I'm trying to head to Ukraine maybe next week or the week after, just trying to sort out refresh my accreditation, and then I'll be back there again. So,
Gotcha. Just some fun vacation time over there, having a
yeah,
yeah, having a good time, relaxing.
yeah, yeah, I can't pretend it's going to be much relaxing, but the next few months are really, really important for Ukraine's war effort. So, really, now that spring is starting to turn into summer, things are going to start moving in a big way, hopefully. So watch this space, basically.
Oh yeah. Well, hey, I mean, with regards to relaxation, at least you're not traveling over to Belgorod. I hear they're being absolutely shelled by Russians right now.
So I saw there's this Russia Today guy, awful person, presenter, British, called Afshin Ratansi,
Hmm.
um, and he tweeted yesterday, US, EU, UK armed forces bomb Russia. And then, like, several hours later, he just went, turns out it was Russia bombed itself.
It was all
It's
of us
just one,
combined. It was like a real Captain Planet situation. Every NATO country simultaneously dropped at the exact same spot. Remarkable coordination work, really. They were showcasing our talent. I am excited to see how the war develops. Nobody on our side wants to see this turn into some interminable stalemate where the Russians get, you know, occasional meager territory gains so they can have fun with a few more war crimes before getting pushed back and so on and so on for eternity. We want a quick and decisive end. And I really hope the Ukrainians are able to bring it home, especially because I don't think America is going to be providing support for that much longer. It really feels like political will for that is waning.
I think it depends on who wins the presidential election, really, um, for ongoing support. But again, you have to understand now, and Americans need to understand now that this is not America standing alone. America might have far more money and military equipment standing around in stock in reserve that it can send over. But when you compare it to GDP, the Baltic states are sending over huge amounts of money compared to how much they earn per capita.
Oh yeah, I'm fully in support of it.
So
To see people fear mongering over like 100 billion being spent with America's military budget, it's ridiculous, right? Like
well,
what?
it's not even real money being spent. It's like they're sending over like stuff that's sitting in a warehouse gathering dust. It's never gonna probably never gonna see combat, but
Yeah,
it might have a like proper use over there. And it's kind of it just it's really tiring, the same old arguments that come up over and over and over again about this. And that's why I wanted to talk to you, because I missed all this the first time round because I was in Ukraine when the war started. I was in Kiev
fun.
when the Russians invaded, right? So, but I was watching the last couple of months. I checked out your like early debates with people, and this was all before the war had kicked off, right? Um, and I remember, and then I started watching some other because I'm interested in how, because my world is really Twitter, and I see a lot of people through that. But Twitter's tiny; it's a tiny, tiny space. There are so many people on other platforms, and people like Hassan Abe are really, really popular, and the kind of bollocks that they spew on the subject, it's really frustrating because that stuff is young people listening to it, and if their minds are being misled by people who don't have the basic facts, it becomes, you know, journalism itself becomes an uphill whole struggle because you're dealing with, loads of 17, 18-year-old trolls who think they understand the world because some smirky asshole told them to read Chomsky and they figured they've got everything sorted out.
Yeah, we had a
And they
falling
really
out with
haven't.
Chomsky recently on this channel. Unfortunately, he was a great hero of mine, but
Mine
um,
too, mine too.
yeah,
Yeah, but I was really disappointed when I learned all the shit that he carried on saying and doing, long past evidence proved otherwise. Yeah, it's just one of those things. But I wanted to bring it back to Hassan when he did a stream afterwards, like a couple of days afterwards, and he was like, I was wrong, right? But in that stream, he carried on trying to make false equivalences and kept trying to say, "Oh, and there's bullshit, and you know the US is lying. They say they want to go to Kiev. They say they have a hit list. It's all lies. It's all bollocks." No one's ever really gone back to that and done a proper like mea culpa, like everything they fucking said was true, and
Mhm.
all of the like, you know, liberal wine mum scaremongering, every fucking thing was true, like right down to like weird false flag attacks and stuff, and no one's ever really kind of, you know, not just said, "Holy shit, I was really wrong," but they haven't, you know, examined their own belief systems, their own information sources that led them to be so catastrophically wrong on the biggest thing that's happened since 9/11 geopolitically.
Yeah, I think so. This is like an ongoing failure in leftist analysis, unfortunately. And leftists are at their worst when it comes to geopolitics, which is really frustrating because it should be where we shine. But there's, you know, there are American exceptionalists who think that like we are the shining light of the world, and there are, I think, American diabolists who kind of have the opposite view, where everything bad that happens has to come from the United States. During the Cold War, of course, we were responsible for orchestrating like atrocities all around the world. We still are, you know, to a large extent. But what a lot of lefties don't seem to understand is that the bad things that the American government does, they aren't done randomly, and they aren't done like, I guess, maliciously in the sense that they do so because they enjoy causing suffering. They do so because there are like sets of material conditions that incentivize powerful nations to do bad things. And this affects all countries. America's the strongest, sure, but it's a pretty ubiquitous set of rules. I mean, this is like basic Marxist analysis. And when you have situations like what's happening in Ukraine, because America is the big dog on the planet, I think a lot of lefties are really hesitant to express any narrative which sounds like a de facto endorsement of American geopolitical hegemon. And that's what they interpret this situation as. They can't see Ukraine or Russia as individual belligerents because everything has to fall under the specter of US imperialism. And to an extent that's not necessarily wrong. We do cast a very long shadow, but it doesn't remove the possibility of other actors being like very unambiguously in the wrong and acting for their own purposes. And that's what Russia's done here, you know. They're acting on pretty like unambiguous fascist, you know, expansionist tendencies, very like ethnic supremacist stuff. And we've seen this happen before. It's not new. We see this happen both with and without American direction. And a lot of these lefties are just hesitant to come across as though they're like tepidly agreeing with the US State Department. And I think it's cowardly of them. I think it was cowardly of Hassan. They've been wrong on basically everything pertaining to this war, and they continue to be. And I think it's just an ongoing unwillingness to fall, even even nominally, in the line of like agreeing with American foreign interests.
So here's the thing about what my probably most controversial opinion is on the left, right? And that is that anti imperialism, as it's understood today on the left, is not the definition of I am someone who is against forms of imperialism, right? It is a conspiracy theory that kind of divides the world into empire and things that are resisting empire, right? Two spheres. And to be an anti-imperialist, you must oppose empire, and that empire is, as you explained, everything that the US does as the global hegemon, and this kind of obsession with moving from what they call a unipolar world into a multipolar world, and this sort of to have this kind of worldview, right? The reason why I say it's a conspiracy is because it's decidedly anti-intellectual. When you look at the problems that are happening in the world, when you look at foreign policy, it's similar to domestic policy. You know, The Wire is one of my favorite shows ever made, right? And it shows the difficulties with how political systems compete with each other. You have loads of competing interests which are corrupt and have anti-corrupt elements within them, and it, you know, it's just a constant mess and back and forth of things dragging on each other. And that's the same as foreign policy. It's not like there's this one will towards this kind of goal of empire. And you know, it's like look at America's relationship with Saudi Arabia, right? America and Saudi Arabia have been long-standing allies, right? And Saudi Arabia at the moment is trying its hardest to play nice with China, with Russia, with Iran now. You know, so the idea that that America and Saudi Arabia represent both elements of one united empire just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. You know, both are fucking evil in their own right, but trying to understand the world in this black and white empire versus anti-empire versus empire mentality is what holds the left back away from so much of the structural analysis needed to understand many of the conflicts happening across the world.
Yeah, well, the thing that really frustrates me is that, like, you know, to get back to Marx, as leftists like to do, he addressed this in a sort of anti-essentialist reading of the nature of the relationship between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, right? Because it's a really common mistake that people make, you know, like, I don't know, baby leftists, where they think like, okay, well, rich people are evil and poor people are good. That was a commonly held belief by some people, even like 250 years ago. And Marx wrote, you know, there are conditions that incentivize bad behavior from the people in power, you know, those who control the means of production. And there are systems that incentivize cooperative behavior from the working class. But these aren't like essentialist dictates. These are forces, sure, but much in the same way that there can be fish who swim upstream. You know, there are more complexities than just, are you part of this class? Are you good or evil? This was like the debate that was had between Slavoj Žižek and Jordan Peterson, where Jordan Peterson misrepresented the socialist perspective as one where, like, the bourgeoisie are innately evil, whereas it's more like the material forces that dictate and control their behavior or influence their behavior are like negative ones. And likewise with empire. I think that, like, the principled approach is, you know, what from an anti-imperialist perspective, what conditions are we looking to fight, right? Like global hegemon, economic domination, neo-imperialism, neo-colonialism, right? The behavior of the World Bank and the IMF, right? Empire. These are things that should be challenged, but technically any country can engage in them, right? Small countries engage in bad behaviors with each other all the time, right? Like the Serbians and the Kosovars, right? Like the you know, the
I'm
attempting
Lebanese and Lebanon and Syria. You know, Lebanon's been a
all
tool of Syria for decades,
all
right?
the
So
time. Sudan, South Sudan, like there are tons of instances where like smaller countries that aren't global hegemons demonstrate obvious tendencies of empire, imperialism, and fascism. So you should be against the tendencies, not just against the biggest theoretical perpetrators of them.
but that's what's insane about this Russia stuff is it's just it's so black and white. It's
Mm.
an invasion, it's colonialism, they're kidnapping children. We're talking about massive crimes against humanity. There's no equivocation to be had here. Yet the left still finds itself hamstrung by this idea of what should we be doing? Oh, we should be encouraging peace between this country that wants to exist and this country that wants to genocide them. And I don't understand what level of, you know, and this, you know, that there's that meme always about liberals with the Ku Klux Klan on one side and Antifa on the other. And the liberals in the middle saying, how about we just kill half of the, you know, and this is so many socialists are finding themselves in this
Yeah, it's
position
the
now.
leftists. Yeah, it's the leftists for this one for sure. Now, the liberals definitely have the better angle in the foreign policy here. They've been right on basically every level, and the leftists that I've seen online have been wrong on basically every level. It's insane, like L after L after L. And I got a lot of hate, by the way, because I was one of the few people on the online left who pushed back against that. And I wasn't trying to be contrarian or anything, you know? I'm not of the impression that like literally every bad foreign policy or geopolitical action has to be undertaken by the United States and its allies. It's possible for there to be like a multipolar, like nuanced approach towards understanding who's in the right and who's in the wrong. But they don't want to sound like liberals. Like at the end of the day, that's it, right? Like they don't want to mistakenly be, they don't want to be accused of sounding like liberals. It's like a big identity thing for a lot of them.
Go right back to January last year, right? And Britain had started sending plane loads of anti tank weapons to Ukraine, right? Like it was the morally right thing to do, but it was politically, you know, fraught with so many people attacking it, right, left, right, and center. You know, we should be peace, it's dialogue, it's blah, 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 blah. If all of those people had been listened to, like Kiev would have fallen. Like there's no doubt in my mind that without the equipment that the Ukrainians had to damage Russian armor, um, we would be looking at a totally different political situation.
It's also a fundamental misunderstanding of how peace works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Peacefulness does not preclude arming yourself for defense. I would think leftists understood this. Like preparing yourself for defense is not the same as like initiating aggression. The idea that Ukraine was going to like initiate a land war against Russia, like people were worried, you know, that this broken, bent, poverty-stricken, corrupt country of Ukraine is going to like conquer Russia because they were given some anti-tank weapons that we came up with in the 80s or something. It's ridiculous.
Mm.
They say the same thing about Taiwan, by the way. I've seen people go like, oh, well, you know, the United States supplies defensive arms to Taiwan in case of a Chinese invasion, but aren't defensive arms really just the same as offensive arms? As though Taiwan
Based.
is going to invade mainland China. Like, what are these people smoking, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
No, it's
yeah,
true. It's true.
it's always the leftists, or well, the leftists and the fascists agree on most of these issues, right? Like arm in arm, you'll see like Marjorie Taylor Greene or like overt U.S. fascists saying basically the same thing: the phony anti-imperialism, the isolationist. We shouldn't be helping out other countries in their struggles. You know,
Well,
we're
you've got Tommy Robinson, the EDL guy here in the UK, who's just overtly far right, who's going, "Oh, we shouldn't be financing Nazis in Ukraine." I'm like, mate, you love Nazis. Like, if like
if
if
they
you're
were
like to
Nazis,
see the
you'd like
logic,
this.
yeah, you'd be like, exactly. So it's insane. We've got a trade unionist here in the UK, a really popular one, who has been to occupied Ukraine and shown solidarity with the Russian separatists. And it's really, you know, he's even stood there in like Russian military regalia and stuff. It's really, really gross. This stuff is never pushed back on. It's just it's out there everywhere here. It's endemic. It's an endemic problem.
You know,
It's a structural problem
if
and
you
it's an ideological problem.
you argue that Ukraine is all Nazis, right? But it's like, okay, well, America is giving arms to Ukraine. America is all Nazis too, right? So really,
Yeah.
it's just transferring hands from
Well,
one group to another, morally
the
neutral.
argument that because there's groypers in the armed services, that means that this country deserves to be wiped off the face of the map. And coming from Americans, it's insane coming from Americans because it's like you guys have massive. You elected a far right president. You know, don't like to come from that position where you had an insurrection in your capital and you had a far right president trying to undermine your democracy. And who openly fawned with dictators and called Sisi my favorite. You know, this stuff is it would have seemed ridiculous if you'd have said that 15 years ago, even in the George Bush era. If you'd have said this is what politics is going to be like 15, 20 years down the line, you would have scoffed at that idea. Because as bad as fucking George Bush was, right, as awful as his invasion of Iraq was, uh, I'm not talking about the problems politically, but the discourse level, the kind of what how you expect politicians to conduct themselves in public has completely just evaporated in Britain too, to a lesser extent than it has in America. But we have these kind of national populist characters coming to prominence all around the world, who are just like, yeah, I'm violent, I'm a fascist, and you know, and democracy is in retreat right now, and that's such a huge problem where that's happening all around the world. And instead of people thinking liberal democracy is the thing that protects us, loads of people are like, yeah, fuck it, what's democracy ever done for me recently? And it comes from a place of people who have never lived in countries that aren't democracies and know how much we've struggled
Yeah,
over
it's
those
an incredibly
issues, right?
privileged. Yeah, it's an incredibly like privileged mindset to take. A lot of like, because you see, like respectfully, but also incredibly disrespectfully to these people. A lot of them are like 17-year-old queer Western doomers with rich parents who think like, ah, well, American hegemon hasn't gone away in the 18 years that I've been alive. So what is this all for anyway? Let it all burn and let the real civilization that I want rise from the ashes. Which every radical thinks, by the way. Every radical thinks, oh yeah, after everything collapses, totally my ideology will rise. But again, to bring it back to the basics, like basically every revolutionary and theorist of socialism from the 18th century and onwards was consistent in their belief that liberal democracy was the most effective bedrock upon which to build socialism, right? The idea that like industrialization takes your society through like liberal capitalism and then to socialism, that was like the initial template. Lenin worked with liberals in Russia to fight against fascists, the Black Knives Army or whatever it's called. I always forget. Mao stopped fighting against the government in order to fight against Japanese colonizers before resuming the revolutionary efforts after World War II. The whole throughout history we see this consistent pattern, which is it's good to fight for the future, but sometimes you have to set your stuff down and realize there will be no future unless a specific group loses. And a lot of people have forgotten that. They don't seem to understand. Like the thing that Russia represents, Russia, like you talk about Nazi countries, Russia is literally
For
like
sure.
like murder journalist, totalitarian regime. The most effective
It's financing all of the far right in Europe as well.
and
Like
they
it's financing
finance
all of them.
the global right, and their most effective military corps is the Wagner group, a literal Nazi militia that conscripts from penal camps and then goes down into Africa to murder black people for their gold mines. And, it's so black and white.
And then you've got people who call themselves leftist arguing that's not imperialism, and genuinely that's the situation that we we have in the kind of discourse not the mainstream left, because in Europe we have social democratic parties in government. It's a normal thing for us, but in America you have the Democrats who are often, some social conservatives. It's a mess over there. I don't even know how you would navigate life over there as someone with kind of center left politics. It's bad, but still, it's not even a difficult choice.
You know,
You're
I
voting for the most liberal Democrat possible. You're like, I'm happy to vote for them, because the alternative is bans on abortion and just insane people, absolutely insane Christian fundamentalists. It just crazy country.
I
I
have
pity you guys, honestly.
a few fans from Russia who have reached out to me offering to talk about, the state of affairs there. And I always turn them down because the first time I was going to talk to somebody, this was right after the war started. There was a fan of mine from Russia who wanted to come on, and I was trying to work out the details, like the date with them. And then I got a really big email from someone who claimed to know them saying okay, they've had to go into hiding. They were, yeah, the government's full on tracking down and hunting the kinds of people who would go on other unlike foreigners streams to talk about what's going wrong in Russia. So don't contact them, don't reply, don't engage with this, just let it be. And I hope he's doing okay, because it's been a year, that's
Yeah, it's
that's
terrible.
yeah, that's the situation over there. And as bad as America is, and I hate America, the ability to be in a country and to openly criticize, not just criticize, you can say whatever you want about people in
So
power here. That's a
so
privilege.
I was in Kiev just before, and in 48 hours before the invasion, lots of people started to leave, and I have a really good friend of mine who's Russian exile living in Ukraine. Right, sought safety and asylum in Ukraine. He's been there for years, and they had to leave 48 hours before the invasion, and just the tragedy of a Russian who'd found exile and safety in Kiev now fleeing again for the second time because they fear for their lives from Russia. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about the Michael Tracy interview because,
Oh
wow, I
God.
mean,
Yeah.
for the amount of times you said Michael as well, that is crazy. I think it must be a Guinness Book of World Records for the most amount of times
I
anyone said
yeah, we
Michael in
it,
an
it
hour.
it took an hour to even get to Ukraine because the first half was him not telling me whether or not he thinks it's a good thing that the Nazis lost World War II. Yeah, he is so lost in the sauce, man. He's incredible. On the plus side, nobody
But
seems to take him seriously.
he's a slippery weasel who and it was really good that you nailed him in a long form argument. You didn't allow him to, and all he wanted to do is kind of waste time, so he didn't have to answer questions. And that Michael Tracy's intellectual dishonesty is kind of the problem that we have on so much of the left, is just people that haven't actually read something other than they read manufacturing consent, and they think they understand everything they need to about anything that happens. And also, you were talking about all of these revolutionary thinkers over the centuries, right? the left is supposed to be a revolutionary force, right? So we had actual existing political revolutions for civil and human rights in the Middle East. It was called the Arab fucking Spring, right? And so many leftists turned their backs on those people. We had, the revolution in Ukraine. It's been warped and turned into a coup d'état. It's just every kind of time that countries who haven't had traditional democracies to live under, who rise up and say, yeah, we demand our democratic rights. So many times the left has failed on the fundamental question of should we be showing fucking basic solidarity with those people or not? And Syria was like the really big test for me. It's what really opened my eyes to uh, I considered myself a leftist for many, many years. That was like a real schism in my way of thinking. It made me really kind of think I am really distinct from these people. I am a liberal in so many ways, domestically and internationally. I don't identify with the socialist left. But for me, I have so many friends and allies, and I think it's really important to build links and connections between, democratic socialists, hard D democratic socialists and liberals, because the fucking forces that liberal democracy is under right now, um, it's not sustainable in the long term. Liberal democracy is fundamentally flawed. It wasn't built to withstand being attacked by forces from within it, and that's what's it's structurally always going to be vulnerable to that. Um, so yeah, I think it's really important to kind of have this kind of dialogue and to talk about these kind of things and to really push back in your various spheres of influence. The way you've pushed back against Hassan, the way you've pushed back against Michael, etc. I think that these kinds of conversations are really important, and hopefully we get some mea culpas over the coming years for people who got this so horribly wrong, or I won't fucking hold my breath.
Maybe. I think, like, ultimately, I think the issue is that it's very easy to dream of a better world, and it's very difficult to build the roadmap on how to get there. And no, like, there has never been a clean and easy path to bettering society. Every move we've ever made to make things better, from like feudalism to liberal democracy to whatever else, it always involves a bunch of sacrifice, a bunch of compromise, a bunch of, oh, we didn't realize it wouldn't work that way. And you have
Yeah,
to live with that and build
it
on that.
sucks.
And people on the left cannot engage with that roadmap building. So what they do is they look and see whether things are perfect or not, and they're not perfect anywhere. And if they're not perfect, they won't like it, but they'll oppose anything that they think is like the wrong direction to go. And for a lot of leftists, even remotely agreeing with Western foreign policy instantly constitutes like a no-go. One of the closest examples we had of like actual anarchist practice was the Rojavans in eastern Syria, who had this like democratic anarchist commune thing going on. The lawlessness
Yeah,
of Syria, right,
but
right.
they were backed financially, militarily to huge billions of dollars
Yeah,
by the
we
US military industrial complex.
we helped them because we had interests in the area as well. And what that meant was, we backed them as they were the most effective fighters against ISIS, which, I'm not a pro ISIS kind of guy. That sounds good to me.
I mean, in fairness, there are a lot of tankies who hate the SDF and who hate the YPG, so and consider them Western pawns and
Oh,
lackeys.
right,
So
but that's
I
no.
think I think there are lots of those that
But that's
exist
what
as
I
well.
mean.
So.
That's exactly what I mean. This was the one of the best examples that we've ever had of society collapsing and good things rising from the ashes. What happened in
Mm.
Syria and the YPG and what have you. And they denounced it because Americans were associated with it, because American foreign interests happened to just coincidentally coincide. It's not like American soldiers were over there to protect anarchist communes. They were over there for a variety of reasons, but it wasn't an ideological alignment. But even the
So
coincidental association led to denunciation from a lot of leftists.
so get this. There were local coordination councils set up during the Syrian Revolution, and there were some really, really, really interesting ideas of democracy. There were places where they would have libraries and they would call into America. They'd have like packed libraries full of people, and they'd be discussing Chomsky books as well, and stuff like this. All of this was while bombing was ongoing, and all of this was while so many people were on the left who these people identified with, um, were saying that they are part of a regime change plot to. I mean, regime change is a revolution by any other name, surely. I mean, and the kind of idea that America was all in on getting rid of Assad is just not fucking true. I
No,
mean, if it
no, we
was
would have
true, they
gotten
got
rid of Assad by
exactly,
now.
like like, I mean, it's like fucking tin pot dictator. Like, the idea that Obama, what he really wanted to do was get rid of it. No, he wanted stability, and what he saw as stability was working with the Russian government. Like, it was like the worst of all fucking policies happened, and it's just these were like valid criticisms of US foreign policy, right? And instead of the actual low hanging fruit, like this is all happening out in the open. America's bombing mosques in ISIS territory. America's doing this, that, and the other thing. America's working with Russia, is bombing hospitals. It's like these were all real criticisms that you could make of what was actually happening in Syria. But no, instead the narrative was Bashar al-Assad is fighting against a Western-backed attempt to overthrow. And the accusation was always to people that were, supporting Democrats inside Syria. Oh, you are pawns of Saudi Arabia. Now Saudi Arabia is playing footsie with Assad, and all of these people are still opposed to Assad. No one's gone, oh yeah, maybe you actually weren't pawns of Saudi Arabia. No, it's just this narrative that, as you said, anything associated with America, even things that aren't associated with America, are just tarred as being something that uh, you should support counter-revolutionary forces against. And that's literally, I'm not just talking about, we should not talk about this. I think people genuinely support the counter-revolutionary forces that are murdering people for fucking social media clout. And it's depressing. It really is. It makes me not want to even bother being a journalist anymore, because with all of these magazines and newspapers shutting down, and it's kind of like, what is the point in competing for information anymore? Like, it just feels like it's kind of like a place that only really legacy media has any future in at the moment. I hope I'm wrong, but looking at the landscape, that's kind of the way it feels right
Well,
now.
I think the problem, so the problem is that you're like in terms of liberals, you're a relatively lone outcropping, because what you do, like independent journalism, this first of all, this is a domain that is heavily captured by Russian foreign interest, right? Like there are a billion, oh yeah, we're going to get to the truth of the matter guys who will go down to a
For
war zone
sure.
with a webcam, and they're all paid by RT, and they'll be like, you see the way this bullet hole is right here? I think Americans have been here, buddy. Like so that's totally captured. And the people most likely to care about alternative media sources aren't liberals. Liberals are definitionally sort of more institutionally complacent. Like they're more likely to listen to like MSNBC or whatever. You take a look at like American Republicans, and they're denouncing Fox News for being too institutional. I mean, these people are
Mm.
insane. I think what we need, in part, is we need a sort of moderating effect for liberals to be more willing to engage with alternative media, because if they do, it will necessarily drive a kind of like attention economy and monetary incentive towards better quality content there, like what you
So
produce.
here's my problem with alternative media, right? 99% of it is just people writing their opinions on bullshit,
Mhm.
right? Jacobin, Novara Media. I mean, if these are the best that the fucking left has to offer, people circle jerking about ideas that are demonstrably wrong on foreign policy, in the case of everything Branko has ever written on the subject of Ukraine, uh, like I don't understand who it's for. I don't understand, what is the point of this? It's not journalism, so it's hard for me to, it's media, yeah, sure, but this is my problem with alternative. Like, to really do something properly, you need to have news, you need to have reporting, and to really do that, it costs stupid amounts of money, because you've got to have people fucking everywhere all the time doing fucking loads of work, and that costs, X amount of thousands of dollars per person per year, for a staff that needs to grow fucking exponentially the bigger parts of the world you want to cover. There's nothing in it. There's no revenue stream to start earning money from that stuff. It's advertising. It's So the idea that alternative media is kind of the solution really is only possible in the cases where you have hugely massively rich venture
So I want to
capitalists
be
like
clear. I don't
financing the intercept.
I don't like alternative media. I just think it's a fact of the matter. I don't think it's like I just think it's unavoidable. The way things have developed basically guarantee that unfortunately a lot of people are going to get their political opinions just from a columnist and opinionist online, or people with a GoPro in a war zone, you know? I just
Mm.
wish that the spread of people who engage with that stuff was a little bit more even, because as it stands right now, like, if you want to get an alternative opinion on the war in Ukraine,
You're
98% of the
going to a
time,
Russian
you're
source.
going
Yeah,
to Russian
yeah,
sources.
100%.
Exactly. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like it's crazy how much that market is saturated, right? With people like I could name like fucking five of them off the top of my head who present themselves as like rogue truth tellers, and most of them have only just had their Russian state affiliated media label taken off
It's
Twitter today.
insane. I
You
get
know,
called a shill by all of these people online, and the only money
yeah,
that I make is from donations and Google AdSense and a
yeah.
Patreon that I
They're
haven't updated in 2 years. These people are paid by the
directly working
state.
for Russian military intelligence, not even the state. They're directly working for an arm of Russian military intelligence. That's not a conspiracy. That's where Russian state media money comes from,
Yeah,
right? It's like it's an influence op, and it's a blatant influence op. And these people like know they're wrong, and they know they're telling lies, and they're getting paid to tell lies, right? All of these people are getting paid to tell lies,
you know
and some
the
of
gray
them.
zone people?
Oh, I know, oh, mate. I was one of the first journalists to ever fucking fight these guys. Go back to 2016. I was writing exposés on these guys on Syria, and everyone who was like involved in electronic intifada and stuff like that were like, "Why are you saying all this stuff? It's a smear. They're not pro-Assad. They're just anti-war." Blah blah blah. Like years later, some of them are like gone to the far right. Even they can't
Oh,
even
they're,
be
yeah, no,
pretended
they're
that they're
fascists. Yeah,
socialists
some
anymore.
of them are neo
Uh,
Nazis.
uh,
They
but again, the
deny
people, you know,
they
I didn't
deny
get.
being Russian assets when one of them, the scrawny one or whatever, literally presented an
Mhm.
Assadist like media or like propaganda bit to the United Nations.
Oh
They're
yeah,
not just paid assets. They're like forerunning paid assets. Like this would be like
he,
arguing that a member of the U.S. State Department isn't an asset of the U.S. State Department.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Aaron went to the site of a chemical weapons attack and did a song and dance routine for the Assad regime, literally where people were killed. It's not, you know, that should be a fucking crime as far as I'm concerned, right? But these are people that have very loud opinions. That occasionally some dumbass guest booker on the BBC or whatever will call Ben Norton on to talk about Nicaragua, because people don't have the literacy or the capacity to know every shithead on Twitter uh, who is working, you know, obviously for far right or far left totalitarian governments for money, for pay, opinions for pay. Basically, it's a really messy business, and it's one that sadly, with Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter, has got significantly worse. It's incredibly demoralizing time to be a journalist who actually tells the truth. To be honest with you, it's you know, the incentive for these people to make money off lies is crazy, and media is getting slowly choked and choked and choked because people don't want to spend the money on it anymore. They just don't.
I mean, you're kind of. I mean, I agree that journalism is functionally dead. I don't disagree. You know, it's in its death throes at the very least, and it's just being replaced with like which propaganda mill has the most aggressive state actor backing it,
So you know,
or you know, like
GB
vindictive
News.
billionaire. You know.
You heard it? Do you hear of GB News? It was like our Fox equivalent that opened up in the
Oh yeah, Great
UK.
Britain. Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah, yeah. So it's a quote unquote right leaning, you know, channel that still has to adhere to Ofcom rules, but basically it's a propaganda outlet, right wing propaganda outlet. Here's the thing: when they launched, they didn't even fucking bother to hire any foreign correspondents, none. Like from the very outset, this quote unquote news channel like was saying we're just not going to do journalism. We're just not going to do foreign reporting. I don't care if you're calling it GB News if that makes you get out clause for having to do journalism, but it just shows how insular and isolationist this kind of ideology really is. They really don't give a fuck about the rest of the world. Um, Particularly, I did like one hit for them when I was in Ukraine. I thought, look, it's worth speaking to everyone. Within like 2 or 3 days of me doing that hit, they had one of their hosts on TV spouting out conspiracy theories. I immediately said, I'm never ever speaking to you guys again. There's just no point even talking to you people. Um, there really isn't. They're ridiculous, ridiculous people.
Th-
And Fox News is like the kind of the global thing that these little channels aspire to be.
this is one of the reasons why I'm really hopeful that the Ukraine war goes well. I mean, the best case scenario would be a coup in the Kremlin and some other oligarch takes over for Putin because Putin's too bloodthirsty or too myopic to lead the country and keep their profits high. Because like Russia is basically the kingpin of like global disinfo when it comes to geopolitics. China does
Mm.
to an extent, but nowhere near on the level Russia does. It's not even comparable. And it makes me think like if there was ever a paradigm shift in the Russian government, if Putin was ever ousted, if the Kremlin changes priorities, it's possible that we would really, really like detoxify the atmosphere for real engagement. Because for years now, basically all geopolitics has just been, you know, do you like listen to the US State Department saying something sensible but coded with like neocolonial interest, or do you listen to the 78 trillion Russia-backed outlets saying something objectively incorrect but like nominally pro the little guy, like pro underdog? And maybe that like cloud could clear a little bit if things change with Russia, if Ukraine wins, if they get pushed back, something else, and we would be able to, I don't know, have real conversations outside whether or not like Assad is fighting against Western imperialism by gunning down journalists and student protesters. Like maybe we could have a better convo, you know?
But I mean, before I came on, you were talking about propaganda, right? And the real way that the grey zone fucking Nazis uh, honed in on the white helmets, which was a Russian-backed smear campaign to target the people they were bombing, right? And their argument was it's propaganda, and these guys were wearing body cams and filming people they pulled out of rubble, right? And if that's propaganda to these people, uh, that's because they consider showing the result of bombings to be propaganda. But these guys, half of them, came up from not being mainstream journalists, from being people that mainly retweeted images from Palestine of children being pulled out of rubble, and so the idea that they're turning around now and saying that images that are exactly the same from medics pulling out of is now propaganda and it wasn't when they were doing it. It's just that's where the kind of intellectual dishonesty began, right? To the point that they were using the term human shields to describe, civilians in
They
Aleppo
don't even they
by,
don't
by
even care about
2016.
Palestine. The only reason they pretended to care about Palestinians was because it meant they could
Well, I
be
don't think they do.
anti-Israeli.
Yeah, I don't think they talk about it much anymore.
No,
They're,
they
they're
don't.
really obsessed with Russia and Ukraine now. Or whatever the latest thing is, whichever the latest government, Nicaragua, whichever one's donating money to the Selena Shim Fund or whatever it is. These people are just transparent grifters, and I don't want to waste my time too much talking about them. I wanted to speak to you because again, you're someone who has influence in on streaming, this kind of new platform. It's new. It's not that new, but you know what I mean. And you're pushing back against these ideas, and I think that's really really important from the perspective of a journalist who has been slogging out the disinfo wars for many many years. And if you look back to that article I wrote on Max Blumenthal, uh, this was so many years before it's just when he started doing his anti-white helmets grift, right? And the pushback I had from so many of his allies, right? People that work for Media Matters, people that work for Al Jazeera English, uh, you know, lots of people who came out to their defense, um, who now have just gone silent, who don't say anything now that he's walking around, at anti-vax events and doing a dance in outside a prison camp in Damascus. It's sort of it's frustrating that I wasted any time trying to reason with people in 2016, thinking if I show this guy is transparently lying about war crimes, maybe people will go, oh yeah, you're right. But they didn't. They just memory hold it. Like they memory hold their, oh, we shouldn't arm Ukraine in January 2022 opinions to bring it back to, maybe we should stop arming Ukraine in 2023.
People
It's just a never ending cycle of this fucking just continuously disingenuous nonsense.
the people who are positively moved by the stuff you do will usually be the quietest about it. The majority of Americans don't think that Russia is some anti-imperialist bulwark fighting against Ukrainian/American colonialism. You contribute to a body of work and of evidence that sways a quiet majority, while a very, very loud group of people, many of whom who have tenuous ties to Russian money, clog up the media space. It does seem like a very like apparent and immediate victory in their favor in terms of the optics of the situation. But I do genuinely think that stuff like that is getting pushed back on, or at least is getting addressed broadly. I think what I really want, by the way, like to be clear, what I really want is for the left to be able to focus on real conversations with regards to anti-imperialism, because I've had conversations before and like, okay, well, what do you think you can do to better the world, or like what path should the world take, or whatever. And I'm fully in favor of like massive decolonization, like industry seizure, nationalization, like third world hegemonic bloc trade partnerships uniting to push back against American trade war. Like I'm in favor of what I would consider to be some fairly like illiberal and radical foreign policy. But right now, all leftist foreign policy is just how do we throat Kremlin cock like most effectively? Like how far down can we get it? And that literally, like all lefty foreign policy conversations right now are like critical support for this fascist dictator because in one speech he compared America to Jews. Open parentheses, they're both bad. Like it's insane. There's nothing here. I want better conversations, and I expect better from the left broadly. Interestingly, Slavoj Žižek has actually written pretty effectively on the war in Ukraine and Russian propaganda on the matter. So as many L's as he's taken on other issues, he's actually like a surprisingly good voice on that particular subject.
Well, he's Eastern European, and now suddenly he's seen the humanity of Ukrainians where he didn't see the humanity of Syrians. Called it a pseudo struggle, a pseudo conflict.
Listen, we
we
stand a king who's seen some growth. Okay, it's the online, it's the left. My bar's like through the floor right now for expectations.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, to be honest, in America, the left is not so much a problem for me. What worries me is the far right.
Yeah.
And the pro-Russian far right is a much bigger threat in America than it is in the UK. In the UK, the closest we ever got, and this is going to piss a lot of your followers, I'm sure, off to hear this. The closest we got to pro-Russian head leader would have been Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, would have been Corbyn,
and people who've been even very principled on arming Ukraine, who refuse to just fill the numbers in. Look at everything he said from 2014 onwards. The moment that Russia annexed Crimea, he published an op-ed said NATO belligerence endangers us all. That's his initial reaction to annexation. You try and ask that he wants to talk about peace. He just wants to talk about peace. Okay, name me a peace plan, right? Name me a peace plan which isn't these areas should be handed off to Russia, right? These are people.
Yeah, they always say like we need to discuss peace. Okay, if your argument is Ukraine should cede the Donbass, then just say that. I disagree, but yeah, right? Acknowledge what you're saying. Stop with this phony. I had a conversation with a viewer recently, which he was very nice, so I don't want to trash talk him or whatever, but he was under the impression that Russia's quote-unquote bids for peace talks were under good faith, when currently they're like, okay, preconditions for talking, you cede all territory, you demilitarize, you can't join the EU, you can't, and at any point in the future we might invade you because we've decided you're anti-Russian. And it's like, why would they talk with that? Why would they engage with that?
That was the peace plan that supposedly Boris Johnson scuppered. I mean, it's just absolute nonsense. This lie that's been told that Russia and Ukraine were about to have peace, and the West
stepped in because
it's reliant. You have to believe these lies to make your worldview that supporting Ukraine to win this war is morally wrong. To have that view, you have to believe that it's morally right to have peace between these two people, and they really want peace, and we're the obstruction to that peace. It's the only way you can rationalize that to yourself, unless you're a fundamentally monstrous piece of shit. So either they believe that lie, or they are just actual fascists. I don't care which. It's not my soul, eternal soul for that's
They
up for
never get
damnation. You
to,
know.
they never get to the second clause of the argument, right? They'll say like, okay, we really don't want to piss off Russia because they have nukes. Okay, that's like a fine starting point. Let's go from there. If we let them take Ukraine and they still are angry and want more territory, what then? Do they get Poland? Like, okay, so what's step two? And they never engage with that.
We already had the step one. The step one was not doing anything about Crimea and the Donbass. That
Yeah,
was
yeah.
step one. We already did that. And also this idea from people that have this understanding of international law, occupations, military occupations, but land taken by military force, the movement of forced transfer of populations. They understand these things in the context of Israel Palestine. They understand
Yep.
them
Yeah,
to the
all of a
letter,
sudden it
right?
all falls into place.
But listen, if you have this position that Israel must adhere to international law and return everything that it's taken to the Palestinians, which is a view I hold because it's a view of international law, right? It's objectively, you must hold the opinion that Russia must cede all of its territory back to Ukraine. Rather that they're saying actually the international community should get together and green light this occupation, make it permanent, and make the people there permanently subjugated to Russian rule. Right? They want to green light that occupation permanently. These are people who understand military occupations are bad in Palestine, but want to make one official, permanent, sanctioned, completely legal,
I'm
and
I'm
that's their
actually
solution to
I'm
this
actually
conflict. And
anti-Palestinian advocacy because Israel does have nuclear weapons and we don't want to piss off Israel. So I think that
that's
Palestine should
exactly that. That's
accept any
you never hear
concessions.
that
Yeah.
argument.
Bid
You
for peace.
never
A
hear
bid
that
for peace
argument.
from Netanyahu, we should be willing to listen. Why aren't the Palestinians accepting this bid for peace from Netanyahu,
So people are going to quote you out of context and
Well,
not
you know what?
understand the bit
Well,
that
it's their
the
fucking
bit that you're
logic.
doing.
I'm
But it
just
is.
agreeing with
I
them.
understand. Yeah, the bit that they're doing really is that Russia's nuclear armed and it can act aggressively, and the West must just completely accept it. And actually, that the West has any say in this, it's nothing to do with us. This is about Ukraine's right to exist. It's whether you fundamentally believe whether Ukrainians have a right to live in a liberal democracy or not. And if you do, you stand with them, and if you don't, you oppose them. And it's as black and white a moral thing that we have had in foreign policy terms for many years. There's just no subtlety to this. There's no nuance being lost out. It's not 8 years of bombing Donbass. That's why Russia intervened. It's like Kosovo. I mean, these people who disagreed with intervention in Yugoslavia are now are using these same justifications for. It's just the most blatant intellectual dishonesty, rubbery, snaky weaseliness from people who don't have basic foreign policy literacy. And if they do, they jump from one thing to the other. You can justify something in one country and oppose it in
Well,
another without any kind of.
Russia has been very effective in promoting an alternative narrative to traditional pro-American geopolitical hegemon as long as the alternative narrative is whatever suits their interests. And I think they've
But
marketed
I
this
think
really
that's
well
had.
to the far right and to the far left.
I think that has collapsed over Ukraine, right? Particularly, I mean, like, I'm part of something called NAFO, which people might have heard of,
Yeah.
right? Look, it's shitposting, right? But it's shitposting for a purpose, right? And Russia weaponized shitposting, right? Point blank. They hired some of the best left-wing shitposters that they could find that would take fascist money for fascist lies, and they employed them to shitpost for many years, right? And they got good at it. Russia is sophisticated in its disinformation in a way that Iran and China aren't. China's wolf warrior diplomacy or whatever, they just their use of language and they try and be really verbose in their threats, and it just sounds ridiculous, right? They paint Joe Biden as a Game of Thrones cool looking ultra Chad, right? These are in a way that the Russians know, like that meme that came out from a Russian Redfish, a Russian state media outlet, immediately after Ukraine was invaded, they had a map of the world which showed like bombings within the last 48 hours, right? To try and show it like, all of these places have been bombed, oppose all bombing. It was shared all over the place. Ken Klippenstein, these people sharing this all over the place. Just a blatant Russian, as in, listen, why are we caring so much about Ukraine? They are much better at their ship posting than, however.
Well, it's the liberal, institutional complacency. I think it's really about
Totally.
alternative media. Well, the
But they
more,
have been pushed back since Ukraine.
yeah,
Their attempts at propaganda have fallen well short,
well,
because
and
it's much harder to propagandize for invading fucking
yeah,
Ukraine
and
than it is the hybrid warfare.
RT America, got rescinded. So there's like less direct
That was a
institutional
beautiful day.
support. It was.
Beautiful day.
And it is more difficult to keep up this like aloof, because before, like, the average American doesn't know what's going on in Syria, right? Like the average American has no clue. Everybody knows what's going on in Ukraine, which means that suddenly all of this like esoteric shitposty dishonesty the Russian government backs is thrown under the highest possible degree of scrutiny. And it turns out that in spite of how much they've tried, there's a limit to how many people you can pull along that, on that hook. Like there is just too much obvious bad behavior from the Russian government for the average person to get this narrative. And that's why I'm supportive of what you do. I mean, of course I am, but like broadly, because it's essential that anti-fascist coverage in journalism extend beyond a rote matter of fact like professional MSNBC journalist coverage. It needs
No,
to
for
go
sure.
beyond that. It needs to be like top to bottom, ground level to top, diversity of tactics and engagement with that disinformation.
But look, I'm an anti-fascist first and a journalist second. I became a journalist because I'm an anti-fascist, right? There should be no distinction between those two, right? Because there is no such thing as journalism under fascism. I have these. I do this because I am a liberal Democrat to my core. These are my ideals, and I believe in them, and I fight for them. And I just think that that in a time such as this, particularly in America right now, that liberal democracy is in a vulnerable state, and that it needs people who can find common ground on the center left, on the center, even on the center right. I don't agree with those guys on so much, but if I can rely on fucking some Republicans to keep voting for military supplies to Ukraine, then that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. That's not something that I'm going to oppose. Um, you know, Particularly in Britain, we've had a conservative government for over a decade now. It's there's only so much you can do. You have to work with what you've got, and we can't all just sit around in fucking town halls all day long, jerking each other off, talking about revolution that's not to come
Oh, we can
when
do that
people are
too.
dying.
Let's
We
not throw
can't. We, I mean,
the
let's
baby
not
out with
throw
the
out all
bathwater.
the circle jerk parties. They're all well and good for certain occasions. However, I just don't think that should be the focus of organizing, personally, because we've got shit to do, and we've got a Labour government to win in the next British general election. That should be the focus for British leftists, not complaining about Jeremy Corbyn. But it is what it is. We march on, and if people don't want to get involved with that and get on that train, then they should, leave at the next stop and do whatever it is that gives them peace. But this is serious business. We've got to start talking about governance and serious foreign policy ideas and serious kind of structural reform to Britain
And
to make it more productive and less fundamentally unequal for people.
And not just whether or not Assad is a bulwark against American
Yeah,
imperialism.
Well, listen, Vaush, it's been absolute
No,
Vaush. Sorry, it's been a pleasure.
it's been a delight to speak with you. I really appreciate it. Thank you for messaging, and I'm more than happy to talk with you in the future. Please stay safe in
So
Kiev.
yeah. So maybe we'll do one of these again, like down the line from Ukraine. I'll give you a shout. Maybe your callers, your viewers can ask some questions or whatever.
Yeah,
I'm sure some of them hate my guts, but stay
I
safe.
think they like you.
Keep, keep, look, I'm just trying to stick up for the libs. I know the libs get a lot of stick, but we're really not so bad, and we don't have such fundamental differences. We all agree on trans rights, on gay rights, on all of these things. We are complete 100% allies on,
I am I
and
am
we
an
have
anti
been.
I am an anti-fascist first too. That is
Yeah,
the
me too.
the overriding political ideology. And they like you, by the way. Hey, just stay out of Belgorod, okay? I hear it's getting pretty toasty down there.
Mate, we'll be in Crimea by summer. All right, that's the hope. All right,
God willing. Good luck.
all right. Take care. Thanks very much, man. Take care.